It was a lazy Saturday afternoon when I found myself walking up the familiar steps to my friend's house. A small box of supplies in my hands. I'd come over to drop off a few things he had asked me to pick up, but more than that, I think I was drawn by the quiet comfort of being around people I knew, though I hadn't expected how different the house felt that day. She was in the kitchen when I arrived. My friend's mom, in her early 40s, carried herself with that rare mix of effortless confidence and gentle warmth. There was an ease to her movements, the kind that made a room feel simultaneously lively and calm. She looked up from the counter and gave me a smile that made me pause for just a moment. Soft, approving, as if she'd noticed something in me before I even entered. "Hey," she said, her voice calm and warm, yet with an underlying energy that made the corners of her mouth curl slightly, playful but composed. "Come on in. Don't just stand there." I stepped inside, noticing the faint scent of her perfume. Something soft, floral, with a hint of citrus. It was subtle, but it lingered in the air, leaving an impression that I couldn't quite shake. She gestured for me to set the box down, and our hands brushed briefly as I passed it to her. The contact was fleeting, but it left a strange, lingering warmth along my palm. My pulse skipped, and I found myself instantly aware of how close we were, even though it was just a casual, practical motion. We exchanged small talk, ordinary words about errands, the weather, my friend's recent habits, but every sentence carried a layer of observation. She had this way of tilting her head slightly when she listened, as if she were taking in not just my words but my thoughts, my intentions, even my nervous energy. Her fingers lightly brushed her hair back from her face, and I couldn't help but notice the subtle elegance in the motion. It wasn't just beauty. It was grace tempered by years of experience, confidence that didn't need to announce itself. Internally, I was a mess of curiosity and hesitation. There was something magnetic about her presence, something that drew me in while simultaneously reminding me of the unspoken boundaries. I kept my voice steady, tried to focus on the task at hand, but every glance, every slight gesture seemed to carry meaning I couldn't quite name. Before I left, she leaned slightly closer as she handed me a tool for a small fix my friend had asked me to handle. "Your hands look strong," she said, her tone casual, almost teasing. There was a subtle smile on her lips, a soft glint in her eyes, and for a fraction of a second, time seemed to slow. I wasn't sure if it was a challenge, a compliment, or something else entirely, but something in that moment lodged itself firmly in my mind. As I walked back to my car, I replayed that small interaction over and over. That fleeting touch, that warm glance, the way she seemed both confident and quietly vulnerable. It all left me strangely restless, aware of feelings I hadn't expected to encounter that afternoon. That was the moment the spark ignited, subtle and unspoken, yet undeniable. A few days later, I found myself back at their house, this time for a more practical reason. My friend had asked me to help with a small repair in the garage. I didn't expect the subtle flutter of anticipation that hit me as soon as I stepped inside. She was there again, her presence immediately filling the space. Not loud or overpowering, just quietly noticeable in the way she moved, the way she watched me. "I see you brought your hands with you today," she said lightly, half teasing, half observing as she leaned against the workbench. Her gaze lingered on my arms as I lifted a box of tools. There was a spark in her eyes, mischievous but gentle, and I felt a heat rise in my chest I wasn't quite ready to name. We started the task together, organizing supplies, moving small boxes, adjusting shelves. It was simple work, yet every moment was charged with a subtle energy. At one point, she handed me a heavy jar of screws, and our fingers brushed in the exchange. The touch was accidental, but the warmth of her hand against mine lingered. I felt the strength in my own hands and noticed, for the first time, the way she seemed almost aware of it. "Your hands look strong," she said again, this time with a playful challenge in her tone. "Prove it." The words were casual, but the way she said them made me pause. Her smile was quiet but knowing, as if she trusted me to rise to the moment while simultaneously testing how I would respond. I laughed nervously and picked up the object she wanted me to handle. She moved closer to guide me, her hand brushing mine as she adjusted my grip. The warmth of her touch was grounding, almost comforting. Yet at the same time, it sent a thrill through me I hadn't expected. Her proximity made me hyper-aware of every detail: the soft sway of her hair, the faint scent of her perfume, the rhythm of her breathing as she leaned in to give instructions. There was an easy intimacy in the way we worked together, a silent rhythm forming between us. We didn't need to speak for every movement. Our gestures were coordinated almost instinctively. When I steadied a shelf for her, she let her hand rest lightly on my forearm, and I felt an electric current pass through that simple contact. Her eyes met mine briefly, and I caught a flicker of approval mixed with something softer, almost hesitant. Despite the playful tone, there was an unspoken understanding. This closeness, this attention, was unusual, forbidden even, but it was electric in its subtlety. I felt the tension between curiosity and caution, desire and restraint, building quietly yet insistently. By the time the task was done, neither of us had said anything overtly romantic, but the atmosphere was charged. As I walked to leave, she gave me a small nod, a smile lingering just a fraction longer than necessary. My heart raced, my mind replaying every brush of her hand, every glance that seemed to carry meaning beyond the words. That day, the playful challenge wasn't just about strength. It was about connection, the beginning of a slow, simmering tension that neither of us could ignore, yet neither dared to name. After that afternoon in the garage, something shifted. I found myself volunteering for small tasks at their house more often than I had any reason to. Grocery runs, carrying packages, even helping with minor gardening. All excuses to be near her again. What surprised me most wasn't the work itself, but how acutely aware I became of her presence in every shared moment. It wasn't grand gestures that caught my attention. It was the tiny, almost imperceptible details. How she would tilt her head slightly when she spoke, as though studying my expression with a quiet curiosity. How her hands moved gracefully when she chopped vegetables, occasionally brushing against mine when passing utensils. I noticed the way sunlight caught the soft highlights in her hair, making it glow in a way that seemed almost deliberate, though I knew it wasn't. One evening, we were rearranging books on the living room shelves. I handed her a stack, and as our fingers brushed, I felt a subtle warmth ripple up my arm. It was fleeting, nothing overt, but it lingered in my mind far longer than it should have. She caught my gaze, and for a fraction of a second, a small, knowing smile played across her lips. It wasn't teasing this time, it was recognition. Recognition that our interactions were no longer just casual, that an unspoken bond was forming in these quiet, mundane moments. She began to share snippets of her life in ways I hadn't noticed before. A laugh about an old mistake at work, a sigh about the pressures of family obligations, a story from years ago that revealed a rare vulnerability beneath her confident exterior. I listened, genuinely interested, yet I couldn't ignore the flutter in my chest as I realized I was absorbing more than her words. I was absorbing her. Physical proximity started to feel different, too. When she handed me a tool, our hands lingered a moment longer. When she guided me to adjust a shelf, her hand touched my shoulder lightly, sending a jolt of awareness through me. I caught myself unconsciously mirroring her movements, leaning closer when she leaned, pausing when she paused. It wasn't just admiration, it was a subtle, growing intimacy. And yet, there was hesitation. I was constantly aware of the social boundary, of the age gap, of the delicate line we were walking. Every touch, every glance, carried the weight of possibility and the weight of restraint. I wanted to linger in these moments, but I also feared misreading them. By the time I left that evening, the small, shared experiences had built something tangible. A rhythm, a quiet connection that pulsed beneath ordinary interactions. It was subtle, almost imperceptible to an outside observer, yet to me it was electric. I realized I was thinking about her constantly, not in a fleeting crush kind of way, but in a way that made me notice how her presence lingered long after she was gone. These small moments, seemingly insignificant, were shaping the emotional landscape between us. Each brush of a hand, each fleeting glance, each shared laugh was a thread weaving an invisible tapestry of trust, attraction, and curiosity. The tension was no longer playful. It was quiet, insistent, and deeply compelling. I wasn't just noticing her anymore. I was feeling her, and it was only the beginning. It was one of those quiet afternoons where the air itself seemed softer, almost intimate. I had come over under the pretense of helping with some minor repairs in the kitchen, but the hum of the fridge and the gentle ticking of the wall clock made everything feel slower, more deliberate. She was there, moving about with her usual grace, arranging items on the counter, but there was a subtle heaviness in her movements that caught my attention. "Some days feel endless," she said suddenly, almost to herself. I paused mid-step, uncertain whether I should respond or simply keep working. Her voice carried a gentle vulnerability I hadn't heard before, a note of fatigue hidden beneath her confident exterior. She glanced at me, her eyes soft but searching, as though measuring whether I could handle more than casual conversation. "Want to sit for a minute?" she asked. I nodded, and we ended up perched side by side on the small kitchen stools, the mundane task forgotten. She started talking, not just surface-level complaints about work or the house, but deeper thoughts, the kind she rarely shared with anyone. She spoke about feeling overlooked at times, of the quiet frustrations of balancing responsibilities, of moments where she doubted herself despite all appearances of control. I listened, my hands resting lightly in my lap, feeling the gravity of her words. Every so often, she would pause, and I realized she was looking at me. Not in a demanding way, but seeking acknowledgement, seeking someone to witness her unspoken weight. Without thinking, I reached out, placing a hand gently near hers on the counter. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let it linger, the warmth of our proximity filling the small space. I felt the pulse of her presence, steady and real, against my own tentative awareness. There was something profoundly human in this moment. It wasn't flirtation, and it wasn't teasing. It was trust. She trusted me with a piece of herself she rarely allowed anyone to see. And I realized, almost painfully, how much I wanted to protect that trust, to honor it, even as the subtle pull of attraction tugged at the edges of my mind. Her hand brushed against mine once, almost accidentally, as she shifted to reach for a cup of tea. That fleeting touch carried weight. It was not just the warmth or the sensation, it was the acknowledgement of our closeness, the unspoken permission for me to care in a way that went beyond casual friendship. For a long while, we just sat there, talking softly about trivial matters to cover the deeper feelings lingering between us. I noticed the small details I had missed before. The curve of her smile when she laughed softly, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners, the gentle exhale that seemed to release a fraction of the tension she carried inside. By the time I left, I was aware of something new. Our relationship was no longer simply playful or curious. It had begun to inhabit a space of emotional intimacy. She had allowed herself to be seen, and I had felt the quiet gravity of responsibility that came with witnessing her vulnerability. The tension between us had shifted, deepening from playful attraction to something more intricate, a longing built on trust, admiration, and the delicate awareness of how careful we had to be with each other's hearts. That day, I realized this was no longer about small gestures or fleeting touches. It was about connection, real, meaningful, and quietly potent. And in that realization, my feelings for her grew, tempered by respect, restraint, and an ever-deepening curiosity about the woman she truly was. It was one of those late afternoons where the sun draped the living room in a soft golden glow, making everything feel intimate and hushed. I had stopped by under the pretext of helping her carry some boxes from the attic, but the mundane task soon gave way to a quiet companionship that felt almost sacred. She moved with her usual calm grace, but there was a subtle warmth in the way she included me in her world, a rhythm we had settled into over the past weeks. We paused halfway through the task, sitting on the steps of the staircase, boxes at our feet. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was charged, a gentle awareness of each other that didn't need words. Then she spoke softly, as if testing the boundaries of the moment. "You've been around a lot lately," she said, her tone casual but carrying an underlying curiosity. "Not that I mind. It's nice." Her words were simple, but the way she looked at me, her eyes soft, attentive, slightly searching, made my heart thud in a way that felt both thrilling and terrifying. I wanted to say something clever, something meaningful, but all I could manage was a quiet laugh and a nod. The intimacy of the moment was already speaking louder than any words could. As we settled into the rhythm of conversation, we began to share small confessions, not of romantic intent, but of thoughts and feelings we usually kept private. She talked about how unusual it was to find someone who listened without judgment, someone she could rely on for comfort and understanding. I found myself responding with honesty, revealing glimpses of my own vulnerabilities, my struggles with self-doubt, the occasional loneliness, and the moments when I longed for guidance and reassurance. The closeness between us became almost tangible. She brushed a strand of hair from her face, her fingers lightly grazing mine as she did. The contact was brief, almost accidental, but it sent a ripple of awareness through me. I noticed how the sunlight caught the subtle highlights in her hair, how her breath shifted slightly when she laughed, how her warmth seemed to fill the space between us without forcing it. There was a rhythm to the silence that followed, a pause in which every glance, every subtle movement, spoke volumes. She leaned back slightly, her shoulder brushing against mine, and I felt a gentle, grounding pulse in the contact. The playful teasing we had shared before was gone now, replaced by something deeper, a quiet acknowledgement of the emotional intimacy we had nurtured in these small, shared moments. I realized then that the tension between us was no longer just playful or curious. It had grown into something richer, more intricate, a silent attraction tempered by respect, a longing wrapped in restraint. Each glance lingered a little longer, each touch carried a quiet significance, and every word spoken held a subtle weight of meaning. By the time I left, I felt a strange mixture of exhilaration and trepidation. Our connection had deepened without a single overt gesture, without crossing boundaries we both understood. The unspoken feelings hung between us, gentle but persistent, leaving me aware that this was no longer simply friendship. It was something that demanded care, attention, and patience. And in that awareness, I knew the slow burn of our bond had only just begun. It was late afternoon, the golden light of the sun spilling through the windows and casting long, soft shadows across the living room floor. I had come over under the excuse of helping her move some heavier furniture, something I could handle with my hands, something that had always been part of our playful, trust-building routine. But this time felt different. There was a quiet anticipation in the air, a tension neither of us had yet acknowledged aloud. She stood near the edge of the sofa, lifting one end of a bulky chair, her movements careful but slightly strained. I stepped forward instinctively, gripping the other end. Our hands met on the worn wooden frame, the contact lingering longer than necessary. The warmth of her palms pressed against mine, firm yet delicate, and I felt a thrill ripple through me. It was a small, practical moment, but it carried weight, an unspoken acknowledgement of trust and dependence. "Careful," she murmured softly, her voice low, almost intimate. I nodded, aware of the way the air between us seemed to thicken. As we moved the chair together, our bodies naturally aligned. Her shoulder brushed against mine, and I felt the gentle pressure of her leaning just slightly into me. Not by accident, but by choice. My heart raced, and I caught myself holding my breath, afraid to break the fragile equilibrium of the moment. We paused midway through, resting our hands on the chair, our eyes meeting. There was a flicker of something in her gaze, recognition, vulnerability, and perhaps a hint of desire. She didn't speak, yet the silence spoke volumes. I realized that this was the point of choice. We could remain in the safe zone of casual closeness, or we could allow ourselves a deliberate step into something more personal, more emotionally charged. I felt a surge of courage, tempered by respect. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, I let my fingers brush against hers, our hands entwining naturally as if guided by instinct. She didn't pull away. Instead, she gave a small, reassuring squeeze, a silent acknowledgement of the moment. Her warmth pressed against me subtly, her shoulder brushing mine in a quiet, deliberate intimacy that made my chest tighten. We laughed softly, breaking the tension, but the contact lingered. It was no longer just casual touch. It had become meaningful, a tangible expression of the trust and connection we had cultivated over weeks of shared moments. I realized then that this was a turning point, the subtle acknowledgement of our feelings without the need for grand declarations. It was emotional intimacy made physical in the smallest, safest ways. By the time the task was finished, the chair was in place, and the room was quiet again, there was a new rhythm between us. Each glance, each movement, each brush of the hand carried a significance that was impossible to ignore. The playful teasing and quiet confessions of previous weeks had built to this, a deliberate, mutual choice to allow closeness while respecting boundaries. As I left that evening, I felt a profound shift in the air between us. The moment of choice had been made quietly, tenderly. We both knew our connection had deepened, that the slow burn of attraction was no longer just simmering. It had become a steady, undeniable presence, anchored in trust, warmth, and the subtle thrill of possibility. It was a quiet evening when I found myself back at her house, the kind of calm evening that seemed to slow time itself. The sun had dipped low, leaving a soft amber glow through the curtains, and the house was filled with the gentle hum of evening life, the distant ticking of the clock, the faint rustle of leaves outside, and the quiet rhythm of our shared presence. We were in the kitchen, a cup of tea in her hands and another in mine. The work and errands of the day had been long, yet here, in this serene domestic space, the weight of those days seemed to lift. She moved with her usual grace, pouring a little honey into her tea, and I noticed the subtle elegance in the way her fingers curved around the cup, the warmth radiating from her hands. We sat side by side at the small table, close enough that our elbows occasionally brushed. The contact was light, casual, yet the warmth of her body so near made my heart beat a little faster than usual. We laughed softly about something trivial, a shared memory from earlier that week, but beneath the laughter lay a quiet understanding, an unspoken acknowledgement of all the small, intimate moments that had led us here. At one point, she reached over, lightly brushing a stray strand of hair from my forehead. The touch was gentle, careful, yet deliberate, lingering just long enough to send a ripple of warmth through me. I felt her eyes on me, soft and attentive, and for a moment, it was as if the world outside had disappeared. No boundaries, no distractions, just the quiet closeness we had cultivated over weeks of playful challenges, shared confidences, and tentative touches. "I'm glad you've been here," she said quietly, her voice carrying a weight I hadn't heard before. It feels different now." Her words were simple yet layered with meaning. I nodded, feeling the same pull, the same quiet certainty that our connection had grown beyond the casual interactions of before. Our hands met naturally on the table, fingers brushing, then resting together in an unspoken gesture of trust and affection. It wasn't dramatic or overly intimate, It was a subtle, human connection that carried everything we had shared in the past weeks. The warmth of her hand against mine, the softness of her glance, the gentle tilt of her head. It all spoke of understanding, acceptance, and a budding closeness that was both comforting and thrilling. We talked quietly, about small things, letting the silence carry its own weight. Every glance, every smile, every brush of her hand communicated what words could not. The tension that had simmered between us had softened into a steady, comfortable presence. A slow-burn connection that no longer needed teasing or testing to affirm itself. When I finally stood to leave, she placed a hand lightly on my arm, her touch lingering just long enough to make me pause. I felt her warmth, the quiet steadiness of her presence, and realized that this was the culmination of all the small moments. The playful teasing, the confidences shared, the tentative touches. It wasn't a grand declaration. It was a complete, heartfelt acknowledgement of mutual care and attraction. As I stepped out into the night, I carried with me the quiet satisfaction of a connection fully realized. The spark that had begun with a simple glance, a fleeting touch, had grown into a steady, undeniable warmth. An age-gap connection built on trust, respect, and the tender unfolding of emotions that only time and attention could nurture. The story had found its natural ending, not in grand gestures or dramatic revelations, but in the comforting intimacy of two people truly seen and quietly cherished by each other.